My son forged my signature to sell my car. I found out the same afternoon a Denver police detective called my cell phone and asked me, very carefully, whether I was aware that a 1969 Chevrolet Camaro SS registered in my name had just been sold for $95,000 to a dealership on Colfax Avenue. I want you to sit with that for a second, because it took me longer than a second to understand it myself. Welcome to Honorline. My name is Harold Weller. Everyone who's ever mattered to me calls me Hal. I'm 68 years old. I drive a Ford pickup with a dent in the tailgate I've never bothered to fix. And until the afternoon that phone rang, I would have told you my son was the best thing I ever built. Better than the company. Better than the patents. Better than any of it. A quick note before we start. Some details in this story have been adjusted for privacy, and a few elements are shaped for the sake of the telling. But the heart of it, the parts that matter, those are as true as I know how to make them. If you're new here, tell me in the comments what city you're listening from tonight. I read every one. I live alone in a single-story house on the edge of Ashland, Oregon, the kind of town where the mountains hold the fog in the valley until almost 10 in the morning, and everybody waves at everybody whether they know them or not. 3 bedrooms, a carport instead of a garage, a kitchen with a coffee maker I bought at a hardware store closeout sale in 2013. It still runs fine. I've never understood people who replace things that work. Every morning starts the same. Up at 5:40, feet on a cold hardwood floor that never quite warms up no matter what time of year it is. I make coffee black, no fuss, and while it drips I stand at the window over the sink and look out at the backyard. At a maple tree Eleanor and I planted the spring after Derek was born. It's taller than the house now. She used to say that tree was the only thing in our life that grew exactly the way we hoped it would. Eleanor's been gone 6 years. Ovarian cancer, the kind that doesn't announce itself until it's already made itself at home. I still keep her reading glasses on the nightstand. I know how that sounds. I don't care how it sounds. Now, here's the part where I tell you what most people assume when they meet a 68-year-old man in a dented pickup truck who buys his jeans at the outlet mall, 2 exits down. They assume pension. They assume Social Security and a modest 401k and careful budgeting around the property tax bill every November. I've watched people build that picture in their heads 100 times over the years, at the hardware store, at church, at the gas station, and I've almost never bothered to correct them. There's a certain peace in being underestimated. You'd be surprised how much a man can learn about people, simply by letting them believe he isn't worth their attention. Here's what that picture leaves out. 34 years ago, I built a company out of a rented garage 2 blocks from a rail yard in Portland. It was called Weller Applied Robotics. And what we did, back when nobody outside the industry cared, was design calibration systems for robotic arms used in warehouse and distribution automation. Unglamorous work. The invisible machinery behind every pallet that gets moved, every box that gets sorted, every truck that leaves a loading dock on schedule instead of 4 hours late. In 2002, I sold the company, not to the highest bidder, to the right one, a firm that actually understood the difference between buying an asset and buying a legacy. What I kept afterward was threefold: a minority equity position that has compounded quietly for over 2 decades, 2 patents I still hold jointly on calibration drift correction that the industry has never stopped licensing, and a portfolio managed by a man named Frank Delgado, who has been my closest friend for 31 years and who reads a balance sheet the way some men read scripture. Between the equity distributions, the royalties, and the portfolio returns, my income runs somewhere around $710,000 a year. I tip well at the diner on Main Street. Nobody there has any idea. My son didn't fully know either, not the real number. Not until the day it mattered more than either of us wanted it to. Hal, don't you think Derek should know the full picture? Frank asked me once, maybe 6 years back, not long after Eleanor's funeral, sitting across from me in his office with 2 cups of coffee going cold between us. He knows what he needs to know, I said. That's not the same as what's true. No, I agreed. It's not. Frank looked at me the way he does when he already knows what I'm about to say and wants to hear me say it anyway, so I did. I wanted him to build something real, Frank. Something that came from him. Not from money I handed him wrapped up like a gift he never had to earn. Frank nodded slowly, the way a man nods when he respects a decision he still isn't sure about. And if he doesn't build it, he said. If he ends up needing you anyway. I picked up my coffee. Then I'll be there when he needs me. That's what a father is for. I just don't need him carrying my money in his back pocket the whole time he's finding out who he is. That conversation sat with me for 6 years. My son Derek is 41 now. He runs Weller Development Group out of Denver, Colorado, a commercial construction and renovation firm he built from a single crew and a used flatbed truck into something with real contracts, real employees, a real name in the local trade papers. And if I'm honest with you, the way a man is only honest with himself at 5:40 in the morning, with the coffee maker gurgling and the maple tree black against the gray sky, I am proud of him. I have never once stopped being proud of him. I just don't always recognize the man he's become. I was standing at that same kitchen window on a Tuesday morning in late September when I heard it. Not loud. A soft, steady tick coming from somewhere above the hallway ceiling, patient and unhurried, the kind of sound water makes when it has found a way in and has decided it isn't leaving anytime soon. I got the ladder from the carport, climbed into the attic with a flashlight clenched in my teeth like some kind of fool, and found what I already suspected I'd find. A section of the roof over the hallway had been letting water in for longer than one storm could account for, and the plywood decking underneath had gone soft in a 2-foot circle, dark and spongy under my palm. By the time the roofer I've used for 15 years, a straight-talking man named Curtis Boyle, finished his inspection 2 days later, he had the expression of someone who has delivered bad news often enough to do it without flinching. "Whole section's compromised, Hal," he said, pulling off his gloves on my front porch. "Decking, insulation, probably some of the drywall underneath once we open it up. 3 weeks minimum. And you can't be sleeping under that hallway while we've got the roof open. First good rain, and you'd have water coming through the ceiling onto your own bed. 3 weeks. I thought about the extended stay motel out by the highway, thought about my neighbor Ruth 2 doors down, and whether I could impose, thought about a dozen sensible options the way a man does when he's avoiding the one sitting quietly at the back of his mind. At 4:11 that afternoon, my phone rang. Derek's name lit up the screen, and something in my chest did the thing it always does when I haven't heard from him in a while, lifted a little before I could stop it. "Dad," he said, and his voice was warm, easy, the voice I remembered from Sunday mornings 20 years ago. "Curtis called me, said your roof's a disaster." "What happened?" "Water's been getting in over the hallway. Whole section needs to come off." "God, Dad." "Okay, listen." A pause. And then, "Come stay with us. Vanessa and I already talked about it this morning when Curtis called. We've got the guest room. It's not doing anything but collecting dust. And there's no reason for you to sit in some motel by yourself for 3 weeks. Something in my chest that had been tight for longer than I wanted to admit came loose all at once. "Derek, you don't have to. Dad, come on." That particular impatience in his voice, the one that means he's already decided and he's just waiting for me to catch up. "Pack a bag. I mean it. It'll be good, actually, having you around for a while." I looked out at the carport, at Curtis's truck still parked in the driveway, with a tarp folded in the bed, and thought about my own house, the one I'd lived in for 26 years, looking for the first time like a place that was finished with me for a little while. "All right," I said. "Thank you, son. Don't thank me. Just don't bring too much. Vanessa redid the guest room last spring. It's actually really nice now. A beat. I'll text you the address, even though you've driven it 40 times and definitely don't need it." I laughed. The real kind, the kind that comes from somewhere lower in your chest than you expect. Before I packed a single shirt, I made one call. Frank picked up on the second ring the way he always does. "Heard about the roof," he said by way of hello. Frank always knows things before I tell him. 31 years of managing my affairs will do that. "Going to stay with Derek for a few weeks while the work gets done," I said. There was a pause. Not long, less than 2 full seconds. But Frank Delgado is not a man who pauses without reason. He thinks fast and fills silence the way a river fills a low place in the ground. immediately and completely. That pause meant something, and some part of me heard it even then and chose not to listen. "All right, Hal," he finally said. "Keep me posted. I will, and Hal, another beat. You need anything, you call me. I always do." I hung up and told myself the pause meant nothing. Frank was probably reviewing a file, distracted by another call. I told myself that all the way through packing a single duffel bag, right up until I stood at the closet in my bedroom and looked at the thing I hadn't fully decided about yet, the Camaro. I bought that car in 1988. 3 years before Derek was born, a rusted-out shell with a cracked block sitting behind a barn outside Medford that a farmer wanted $200 to be rid of. It took me 11 years to bring it back, working nights and weekends in the garage while Eleanor brought me coffee and told me I was out of my mind. Canary yellow, numbers matching 396 big block, the kind of car that stops conversations in parking lots. Eleanor used to sit in the passenger seat on summer evenings with the windows down and her hand out the window riding the wind, laughing at nothing in particular. Derek learned to drive stick in that car on an empty stretch of county road the summer he turned 16, grinding the gears so badly the first afternoon that I had to bite down on my own laughter so I wouldn't embarrass him. My own garage isn't built for it. No climate control, no security, just an old carport that lets the coastal damp settle into everything it touches. 3 years ago, when Derek's business started doing well enough that he built a proper shop building on his property outside Denver, heated, insulated, alarmed, he offered to store it there. "It's not doing anybody any good sitting under a tarp in Ashland." "Dad," he'd said, "let me take care of it. I'll treat it right." I'd said yes, without much thought, the way you say yes to your son when he's offering to take care of something you love. The title stayed in my name. I never saw a reason to change that. It never occurred to me that I'd need to. I stood in that closet a long moment before I zipped the duffel bag, thinking about the car sitting in Derek's shop 3 hours south of where I was about to be living for the next 3 weeks, and something small and unnamed moved through my chest, gone before I could look at it directly. I packed light. One bag, Eleanor's reading glasses tucked in a shirt pocket where nothing could crush them, because some habits don't care how old you get. The drive to Denver from Ashland is long, the better part of a day if you don't push it. And I didn't. I stopped for lunch outside Boise, watched the land change from green to high desert to the first hard shoulders of the Rockies, and thought about Derek at 16, grinding those gears, laughing at himself before I even had the chance to. I got there a little after 6 in the evening, the sky over the foothills going that particular gold that only shows up in early autumn, and I let myself feel good about it. I let myself believe, the whole drive in, that this was simply a season of being close to my son again, nothing more complicated than that. I would understand later, much later, that Frank's pause on the phone that afternoon hadn't been distraction at all. Frank had heard things through his own channels about Derek's business, things I hadn't wanted to see, and he hadn't wanted to be the one to show me. In that pause, he'd made a quiet decision not to say what he was thinking. But I was pulling into a gravel driveway at the edge of a subdivision outside Denver, and my son was walking out the front door with his arms already half raised in greeting, and I wasn't thinking about pauses, not yet. Derek's house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac in one of those Colorado developments where the lawns look engineered rather than grown, xeriscaped in careful patterns of gravel and native grass. The house is all variations on the same modern farmhouse silhouette with black window frames and board and batten siding. His place was the largest on the block, a 5-bedroom with a heated shop building out back that I could see even from the driveway, bigger than some houses I'd lived in. He met me before I'd even gotten the truck door fully open, clapped a hand on my shoulder hard enough to rock me half a step, the same easy grin he's had since he was a boy. "Dad, you made good time. Roads were clear. Come on, leave the bag. I've got it." "Derek, I've been carrying my own bag since before you were born." He laughed, and for just a second he looked exactly like the boy who used to grind gears on that county road. Wide open, uncomplicated, not yet whatever he'd quietly become in the years since. Vanessa was waiting at the top of the front steps, and she was exactly as I remembered her from Christmas the year before, sharp and put together in a way that takes real effort but is built to look like none at all. "Hal," she said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. She smelled like something expensive. "So glad you're here. How was the drive? Long, but fine." "Well, come in. I'll show you the guest room. I actually did some work on it last spring. I think you'll like it." The inside of the house was the kind of beautiful that photographs well. Matching furniture, fresh flowers on the entry table that nobody had bought because they liked flowers, a kitchen island, the size of my old dining room. Vanessa led me down a side hallway past a home office and a laundry room to a bedroom near the back of the house, comfortable enough, a queen bed and a dresser, and a window that looked out at the side of the shop building. "You've got your own bathroom right across the hall," she said. "And that shop building you can see out the window, that's actually where your car's kept. Derek had it climate-controlled special. He's very particular about it. You know how he is." "I appreciate that," I said, and I meant it. I set Eleanor's reading glasses on the dresser, and for a moment I stood there looking out that window at the shop building, at the shape of it going dim in the evening light. And I thought, well, at least I'll be close to it. I had no idea, standing there that first evening, just how close, and in what way, that closeness was about to matter. 3 days into my stay, I started noticing things the way you notice a draft in a house before you can find where it's coming from. Vanessa's phone buzzed constantly, face down on whatever surface was nearest her, and she'd glance at it, with a flicker of something tight around her eyes before turning it over and continuing whatever conversation we'd been having, as though nothing had happened. She'd taken to stepping out onto the back patio to take certain calls, sliding the door shut behind her, even in the cold. Her voice pitched low enough that the words dissolved into the hum of the furnace before they reached me. I told myself it was nothing. People have private conversations. My daughter-in-law owed me no accounting of her days. But I've spent 40 years reading rooms for a living, watching engineers' faces, when they told me a deadline was fine when it wasn't, watching investors nod along to numbers they didn't believe. I know what worry looks like when it's being managed rather than felt. And Vanessa was managing something. Derek, for his part, seemed distracted in a different register entirely. The particular distraction of a man juggling business math in his head at all hours. He'd disappear into his home office after dinner, and the light under the door would still be burning past midnight. Twice I got up for water in the small hours and heard him on the phone in there, his voice low and clipped, in a way I recognized from my own younger years, the tone men use when they're trying to make a problem sound smaller to someone than it actually is. I didn't ask. That's not entirely true. I didn't ask yet. On my 5th morning there, I woke at my usual 5:40, dressed quietly, and made my way down the hallway toward the kitchen for coffee, the way I always do, wired into old habits no guest room can undo. The house was still, just the low hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the heating system cycling on. And then I heard Vanessa's voice, low, urgent, coming from the kitchen where the light was already on. "They said 30 days, Derek. 30 days or they're filing." Her voice cracked slightly on the word filing. "I can't have a judgment on my name. I can't. Do you understand what that does to everything we've built?" I stopped in the hallway, my hand finding the wall beside me the way it does when my body understands something before my mind has caught up. "Keep your voice down," Derek said, and there was an edge in it I hadn't heard from him in years, not anger exactly. More like a man standing at the edge of something and trying not to look down. "I'm handling it. You've been handling it for 3 months. $52,000 doesn't just handle itself, Derek. $52,000. The number landed in my chest like a stone dropped into still water, the ripples moving out slow and wide. "I know the number, Vanessa. I built it, remember. I know exactly what the boutique cost. I told you I could make it work. I told you I had a plan. Your plan was borrowing from a company that charges 28% interest and sends people to your workplace when you're late on a payment. That's not a plan. That's a house fire. Silence. The particular silence that follows a truth nobody wanted spoken out loud. "I'm sorry," Vanessa said, finally, quieter. "I didn't want you to know how bad it got. I thought I could fix it before you noticed. Well, I noticed. And now we've got 30 days before Sterling Capital Solutions files against you personally, which means it shows up in our credit, which means the bank pulls the line of credit I need for the Larimer project, which means I've got 40 men on payroll and no way to make it next month. Do you understand what you did? I stood in that hallway for what felt like a full minute, though it was probably closer to 15 seconds, my hand flat against the drywall, my sock feet cold against the hardwood, the refrigerator humming behind all of it like nothing in the world had just shifted. Here's what I did not do. I did not walk into that kitchen. I did not clear my throat or let my face do what it wanted to do, which was fall open, with the particular grief of watching your children carry something heavy that they never told you about. Here's what I felt instead. A very specific, very old kind of tenderness, mixed with something colder underneath it, a recognition that my son had a $52,000 problem in his house and a father down the hall worth more than 50 times that amount, and he had said not one word to me. I turned around, walked quietly back to my room, and sat on the edge of the bed with my hands on my knees. Eleanor's reading glasses caught the early light on the dresser. I looked at them for a long moment, the way I sometimes look at them when I need to think something through the way she would have. Vanessa had a boutique. I remembered now dimly something Derek had mentioned over the phone maybe 8 months back. A clothing line she wanted to launch, curated pieces, something about sustainable fabric sourcing. I remembered being glad for her, glad she had something of her own outside the shadow of Derek's business. I hadn't asked how it was funded. I hadn't thought I needed to. I picked up my phone and called Frank. He answered on the first ring the way he always does. Frank, I said, I need you to do something for me quietly. A company called Sterling Capital Solutions. Find out everything you can. Who they are, what kind of lending they do, what their collection practices look like. A pause, shorter this time, but present. Hal, that name doesn't sound like a company you want your family owing money to. I know. Whose debt is it? I looked at the closed door, at the hallway beyond it, at the whole quiet architecture of a house built on numbers I didn't yet fully understand. My daughter-in-law's, I said. And I think my son's about to try and solve it in a way that's going to cost more than the $52,000 he thinks it will. That afternoon, Derek knocked on my door with 2 coffees, the way he used to when he wanted something and wanted it to feel casual. Hey, Dad, you settling in okay? Fine, son. This is a good house. He sat on the edge of the desk chair, turning his mug slowly in his hands, and I watched him work up to something the way I'd watched him work up to things since he was a boy asking to borrow the truck. Listen, I wanted to ask you something. That storage arrangement for the Camaro, is that something you'd ever consider making permanent? Like formally transferring the title into my name? Just for insurance purposes. Mostly. Makes the coverage cleaner on my end since it's living in my shop full-time now. Something in my chest went very still and very quiet, the way a room goes quiet right before a storm breaks. Why would the insurance need the title in your name? I asked. I've got it covered under my own policy, has been for years. It's just, if something happened while it's in my building on my property, there's liability stuff that gets complicated with 2 different policies overlapping. My insurance guy mentioned it last week when I called about something else. It's really not a big deal, Dad, it's just paperwork. I looked at my son, 41 years old, sitting in a guest room chair with a coffee mug in his hands, asking me to sign over a car that held more of his mother in its seats than any photograph in this house did. 3 days after I'd overheard him arguing about $52,000 in debt behind a closed kitchen door. Let me think about it, I said. Something crossed his face, there and gone, quick as a cloud shadow. Sure, no rush. Just whenever you get a chance. He left, and I sat with my coffee going cold in my hands, and I thought, not yet, Derek. Not like this. Not without you telling me the truth first. The days that followed had a texture I recognized without wanting to. I learned which floorboards in that house creaked, and which held quiet. I learned that Vanessa ran the dishwasher every night at 9, whether it was full or not. The way people manage small, controllable things when the large, uncontrollable ones are eating them alive. I learned that Derek's office light stayed on past midnight most nights, and that the calls behind that door had gotten shorter and more clipped as the days went by. I also learned, because I made it my business to learn, a good deal more about Sterling Capital Solutions than either Derek or Vanessa likely knew themselves. Frank called me on a Thursday evening while I sat in the guest room with the window cracked, looking out at the dark shape of the shop building where the Camaro sat under its cover. Sterling Capital Solutions is a private lending operation registered out of Cheyenne, he said. Not a bank, not federally regulated in any meaningful way. They specialize in high-interest personal loans to small business owners who've been turned down by traditional lenders, and their collection tactics have generated 3 separate consumer complaints filed with the Colorado Attorney General's office in the past 2 years. 28% APR is actually on the low end of what they charge. Hal, this isn't a company that negotiates. This is a company that escalates. How escalates? Judgment, wage garnishment, and in at least one documented complaint, a collections agent showing up at a woman's place of employment and speaking to her supervisor about the debt. That's the kind of pressure Vanessa's looking at in 30 days if this doesn't get resolved. I closed my eyes and pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of my nose. $52,000, I said, half to Frank, half to the dark window in the shape of the Camaro beyond it. My son is sitting on a fortune he doesn't know exists, and he's about to try and solve a $52,000 problem by taking my wife's car out from under me. You don't know that's what he's planning. I know exactly what he's planning, Frank. I've built things my whole life. I know what it looks like when a man's trying to build his way out of a hole he doesn't want anyone to see him standing in. Frank was quiet a moment. What do you want to do? I looked at the shop building one more time, at the pale rectangle of light under its side door, where the security panel blinked its small green eye in the dark. I want to see what he does before he knows I'm watching, I said. And Frank, one more thing. Pull the title, history, and registration on the Camaro. I want to know exactly what paperwork exists, what's on file with the Colorado DMV, and what it would take for somebody to move that car without my signature actually being on the document. Hall. His voice had gone careful, the way it does when he's worried, and trying not to show it. That's a strange thing to be asking about your own son. I thought about the $52,000, about the 30-day deadline, about Derek's clipped voice through a closed kitchen door talking about payroll and a bank line of credit that could collapse if this didn't get handled fast, and about how a desperate man convinces himself that borrowing without asking isn't really stealing if he plans to put it back before anyone notices. I've raised that boy for 41 years, I said. I know exactly what desperation does to a man who spent his whole life being told he built everything alone. Pull the paperwork, Frank. I'd rather be wrong and feel foolish than be right and be blindsided. I hung up, and I sat in that guest room a long while with the window cracked and the cold October air coming in off the foothills, and for the first time since I'd pulled into that gravel driveway with my heart lifting at the sight of my son's arms raised in welcome, I let myself feel the shape of what was coming. I didn't know yet how right I was. I only knew, the way you know weather from a distance, that something was moving toward all of us, and that it was going to arrive whether any of us were ready for it or not. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon, while I was standing in Derek's kitchen, slicing an apple. The knife stopped halfway through the fruit when I saw the Denver area code on my screen and didn't recognize the number. Mr. Weller? This is Detective Sarah Nakamura with the Denver Police Department, Financial Crimes Unit. I'm calling to verify some information regarding a vehicle registered to you, a 1969 Chevrolet Camaro. Can you confirm you're the current owner of record? The knife went still against the cutting board. Yes, that's my car. What's this about? Sir, we received a fraud referral this morning from Rocky Mountain Classic Motors on Colfax Avenue. A man presenting himself as the vehicle's owner completed a sale this morning for $95,000. Our fraud unit was contacted because the finance manager flagged discrepancies in the signed title transfer. Mr. Weller, I need to ask you directly. Did you authorize the sale of this vehicle to anyone? The apple sat forgotten on the cutting board, browning slightly at its cut edge, and I stood in my son's kitchen with the phone pressed to my ear and felt something in my chest drop away entirely, the floor of it simply gone. "No," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I had any right to expect. "I did not authorize that sale. Can you tell me who had access to the vehicle, sir?" I looked out the kitchen window at the shop building across the yard, at the space where a canary yellow shape should have been sitting under its cover and was not. "My son," I said. "It's been stored on his property. He's the only other person with access." There was a pause on the line, the particular pause of a professional choosing kind to her. "Mr. Weller, would you be willing to come down to the station and give a statement? We'll also need you to look at the title transfer documentation. There's a signature on it we'd like you to verify. I'll be there within the hour." I hung up and stood in that kitchen a long moment, the refrigerator humming behind me, the same sound that had been humming behind me the morning. I first heard Vanessa's voice crack over a number that had just cost me a piece of my late wife's life along with it. I did not call Derek. I did not call Vanessa. I picked up my truck keys, walked out the front door, and drove to the Denver Police Department's Financial Crimes Division, with my jaw set and my hands steady on the wheel, in a way that surprised even me. Detective Nakamura was younger than I expected, sharp-eyed, patient in the way good investigators learn to be. She sat me down in a small interview room and slid a folder across the table. "This is the title transfer document submitted at the point of sale," she said. "Can you tell me if that's your signature?" I looked at it a long moment. It was close. Close enough that a busy clerk at a dealership might not have looked twice. But I have signed my name more times in 68 years than I can count, on contracts worth more than most people's houses, and I know the particular way my own hand moves across a page. The small hitch in the H, the way the final L trails off, rather than closing clean. This was not that. This was someone who had studied my signature from old documents, from checks, from the title itself, and had done a careful, patient, deliberate job of approximating it. "That's not my signature," I said. "It's a good copy, but it's not mine. The dealership's finance manager, a woman named Priya Chandra, has 12 years of experience and flagged it for exactly that reason, sir. She said something felt off about the pen pressure and the way the seller was rushing the paperwork. She ran a standard verification against DMV records on file from an old registration renewal, and the signatures didn't match closely enough to satisfy her. That's what triggered our involvement." Nakamura leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Weller, can you tell me the name of the man who sold this vehicle?" I sat with that question a long moment, the weight of it settling into my chest like something physical, and I thought about Derek at 16 grinding the gears on that county road, about Eleanor's hand out the window catching the wind, about a $52,000 debt and a 30-day deadline, and a man convincing himself that borrowing without asking isn't stealing if he means to put it back. "My son," I said. "Derek Weller." Nakamura's expression didn't change, the trained neutrality of someone who has delivered and received hard news often enough to know how to hold a room steady. "I need to ask you directly, sir. Do you want to press charges?" I looked at the folder on the table, at that careful, patient forgery of my own name, and I felt something break loose in my chest, old and slow, the sound old wood makes when it finally gives way, not with a crack, but with a long, low groan. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "I need to hear it from him first." I called Derek from the parking lot of the police station, my hands finally, faintly unsteady on the phone. "Dad." His voice cracked on the single syllable, and I understood immediately that he already knew, that someone from the dealership or the police had already reached him, that he'd spent the last hour understanding exactly what was coming. "Dad, I can explain." "Come to the station, Derek. Now, and bring Vanessa." He arrived 20 minutes later, gray-faced, moving like a man walking into deep water. Vanessa trailed behind him, her composure gone entirely. Mascara smudged at the corners of her eyes where she'd been crying in the car. Nakamura put us in a small conference room, not an interrogation room. A small mercy, I understood. Only later she'd extended deliberately and left us alone for a few minutes before the formal statement. "Dad," Derek said, sitting across from me, his hands flat on the table, the way mine go flat when I need something solid to hold on to. "I was going to put it back. I swear to you, I was going to buy it back within 60 days once the Larimer project closed. I never meant for it to actually leave the family. I just needed the cash to cover Vanessa's loan before Sterling filed, and the bank wouldn't move fast enough on my line of credit, and I didn't know what else to. You forged my signature, Derek. The words landed in the small room and stayed there. Derek's jaw worked, and for a moment I watched my 41-year-old son try to find a version of the truth that didn't sound like what it was, and fail. I know, he said finally, barely above a whisper. I know what it looks like. It doesn't look like anything, son. It is what it is. You took a car that wasn't yours, sold it to strangers, and signed my name to make it legal. That's not a mistake. That's a choice you made, one careful step at a time, over what sounds like weeks of planning. Vanessa made a small broken sound beside him, and I looked at her, really looked at her, at the woman who had sat across my dinner table for 6 years, while I never once asked her a real question about who she was underneath the composed exterior she wore like armor. This isn't his fault, she said, her voice shaking. It's mine. I borrowed money I shouldn't have, from people I shouldn't have, to build something I was too proud to admit was failing. I did that. He was just trying to protect me from what I did. I understand that, I said, and I meant it, because I did understand it the way you understand the shape of a fire, even while you're standing too close to it. But protecting you didn't require stealing from me, Vanessa. It required one honest conversation at my kitchen table 3 weeks ago, the night I heard the two of you arguing about it through a closed door. Derek's head came up sharply. You knew? I've known for 3 weeks. I had Frank Delgado pull everything on Sterling Capital Solutions before you ever picked up a pen to forge my name. I know exactly what kind of company was threatening to file against your wife, and exactly what kind of pressure they'd have put on both of you if it went 30 more days unresolved. Then why didn't you just? Derek's voice cracked entirely, and he pressed both hands against his face for a moment before dropping them. Why didn't you just help us, Dad? If you had the money sitting right there, why did you let it get this far? I sat back in my chair and let the question hang there, because it deserved a real answer, not a quick one. Because I wanted you to come to me, Derek, not because you found out what I'm worth by accident and decided I owed you access to it. I wanted my son to sit across from me and say, Dad, we're in trouble and I don't know what to do, and let me be the father who helps him carry it. Instead, you decided I was an asset to be quietly liquidated while I was asleep down the hall in your guest room. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. That's the part that isn't about the money at all, son. That's the part about what you think of me. The room was silent a long moment. Vanessa was crying openly now, and Derek sat with his hands pressed flat on the table, staring at them like they belonged to someone else. What happens now? He finally asked. I thought about the folder in Nakamura's office, about the careful forged signature, about a young finance manager named Priya Chandra, whose diligence had likely saved my son from a mistake he could never have unmade. I thought about Eleanor, about her hand out the window of that yellow car, about what she would have wanted for the boy she raised alongside me for 18 years before cancer took her from both of us. I'm not pressing charges, I said, and I watched relief crash through Derek's whole body like a wave breaking. But that's not the same as nothing happening, Derek. Rocky Mountain Classic Motors is unwinding the sale as fraudulent, which means the car comes back to me, and it means you're going to spend the next several months personally making that dealership whole for the costs of unwinding a $95,000 transaction out of your own pocket, not the business's. And Sterling Capital Solutions is still going to be sitting on that 30-day deadline, whether or not you have a car to sell, which means you and Vanessa are going to sit down with me tomorrow morning and have the honest conversation you should have had 3 weeks ago. You'd help us, Derek said, and there was something raw and disbelieving in his voice, a boy's voice underneath the 41-year-old man's. Even after this, I'd help you, I said, because that's what I came to Denver to do in the first place, whether either of us understood it that way at the time. But it's going to look different than you think, son. I'm not writing a check and walking away. Frank's going to sit down with you and go through the Larimer numbers line by line, and we're going to figure out together whether Sterling gets paid off or whether we fight the legality of that loan, because a company that charges 28% interest and sends collectors to a woman's workplace has broken more than one law getting there. And you and Vanessa are going to see a financial counselor, not because I don't trust either of you, but because trust is exactly the thing that got broken here, and it doesn't get rebuilt by me quietly making problems disappear. Vanessa reached across the table, not to Derek, but to me, and took my hand in both of hers. I'm sorry, Hal. I should have told you the truth the first week you were staying with us. I was so ashamed. Shame is a poor architect, Vanessa, I said, and I let her hold my hand a moment longer before I gently pulled it back. It builds walls where a door would have done just fine. We drove back to the house separately, 3 vehicles moving in a slow line through the Denver evening traffic, and I remember looking in my rearview mirror at Derek's headlights behind me and thinking about a boy grinding gears on a county road, laughing at himself before I had the chance to laugh first, and understanding that the boy was still in there somewhere, buried under 20 years of building something he thought he had to build entirely alone. Rocky Mountain Classic Motors returned the Camaro to me. 11 days later, the paperwork fully unwound. Priya Chandra herself walking me through the final documents with a quiet, careful professionalism I made a point of thanking her for directly. I drove it back to Derek's shop myself, parked it under its cover in the same spot it had occupied for 3 years, and stood there a long moment with my hand resting on the hood, feeling the cold metal under my palm, the way I used to feel Eleanor's hand resting on my shoulder when she'd come find me working in the garage on a Sunday afternoon. The months that followed were not easy, and I want to be honest with you about that, because I don't believe stories like this one do anyone any favors when they pretend a single hard conversation fixes 20 years of a man learning to hide his fear behind competence. Derek and Vanessa met with a financial counselor every other week through the winter. Frank and I worked with an attorney to challenge the legality of Sterling Capital Solutions' lending practices, and by February, the Colorado Attorney General's office had opened a formal investigation into the company, based in part on documentation. Frank helped compile documentation that ultimately joined complaints from 11 other borrowers across the state. Derek spent 4 months personally repaying Rocky Mountain Classic Motors for the costs of unwinding the fraudulent sale, working weekends on top of his regular contracts to cover it, and I let him, because a debt paid with your own hands means something a debt forgiven by someone else's does not. I moved back into my own house in late October once the roof was finished, and Derek drove down from Denver 2 weekends later, alone, without Vanessa, just to help me move the last boxes back into the hallway closet. We worked mostly in silence, the comfortable kind, and when we finished, he stood in my kitchen looking at the maple tree out the window the way I do every morning. I used to think you didn't notice things, he said. Growing up. I used to think you were just, I don't know, quietly there, steady, uninvolved in the details. I noticed everything, son. I just didn't always say what I noticed. Why not? I thought about that question a long time before I answered it, the way I've learned to think about the questions that actually matter. Because I thought silence was a kind of respect, I said. I thought if I stayed quiet about what I had, you'd build something that was entirely yours, and you'd never have to wonder whether your success was really your own. I was wrong about that, Derek. Silence isn't respect. It's just distance wearing a nicer name. And distance, if you let it sit long enough, turns into a wall neither one of you knows how to climb back over. Derek was quiet a long moment, looking at that tree, and as he said the thing I'd been waiting 6 months to hear him say, without my having to ask for it. I'm going to do better, not just paying it back. Being honest with you, before things get to a police station, that's all I ever wanted, son. Not the money. Never the money. Just you telling me the truth before I have to find it out from a detective. He hugged me then, the way he hadn't since he was maybe 12 years old, and I held onto my boy in that kitchen for a long moment, feeling the years fall away from both of us all at once. I still keep the Camaro at his shop. That surprised people who heard the whole story later, Frank especially, but I meant it as exactly what it was, An act of trust extended again, deliberately, with clearer eyes this time. Some things you don't protect by locking them away. You protect them by handing them back to the person who needs the chance to prove they've learned to carry them properly. There's a girl in the neighborhood, Ruth's granddaughter, 8 years old, who rides her bike past my house most afternoons and stops sometimes to ask about the maple tree, whether it's the tallest one on the street, whether trees ever get tired of growing. I told her once that trees don't get tired of growing. They just grow at whatever pace the ground allows. And some years that pace looks like almost nothing at all, right up until the year it doesn't. She thought about that for a long moment, the particular serious thought of an 8-year-old working through something bigger than she quite has words for yet. And then she said, "So the tree was always trying. You just couldn't see it." I think about that more than I probably should. I think my son was always trying too, in the years I couldn't see it, carrying something heavy in a silence he'd learned, maybe, from watching his own father carry things quietly for far too long. I don't believe in revenge dress it up as justice. I don't believe a debt gets settled by punishment alone. I believe a family gets rebuilt the same way a house gets rebuilt after the water finds its way in, plank by plank, with somebody willing to climb back up into the attic and see exactly how bad the damage really is before anyone starts pretending it was never there at all. If this story moved something in you tonight, tell me in the comments which moment hit hardest, and if you know someone carrying a debt they're too proud to name out loud, maybe send this one their way. There are more stories coming, and some of them will surprise you. A note before we close. Certain details in this story were adjusted for privacy, and some elements were shaped for the telling. But what it leaves behind in you, that part was never fictional at all.